All right, let's go ahead and dive into day number 3 of my Monster a Day art challenge. Uh, so basically, I'm sitting down making a monster every day. Some days I'm just going to record myself doing it, other days I'm going to live stream. Today's one of those days where I'm recording. So, day 3, just kind of getting into it. And so, really just been kind of focusing on drawing monsters just using pencil and ink, and that's what I'm going to continue with today. But I want to try something a little bit different, show you a different take on this. So the last 2 days I've been just drawing the whole body, thinking about the basic shapes of the monster, sketching it out in pencil, and then outlining it with pen and ink. And I've really, like I said, I've been focusing on drawing the entire body. And when I got into drawing monsters and making monsters 5 years ago, that's primarily how I did it. I was just focusing on doing the entire monster, and then after a while, it got to the point where I'm like, okay, wasn't bored with it, but I wanted to try something different. I wanted to really think about more of an interesting composition, because when you just draw the whole body and it's more like a character study, it's the character, the monster's like dead center, just very symmetrical, and it's you get really cool monsters and they look awesome, but yet they're a little plain and sometimes can kind of feel a little bit boring, especially since I don't really do much of a background with the monsters. So I developed a different sort of series or line of monsters, something that I call monster selfies. And the idea was like, well, what if monsters had smartphones and could take selfies? What would those look like? And so it would be, much closer, and you'd see more of just the face and not the entire monster's body. So that's kind of where I'm going to go today, is thinking about really a close up view of a monster and what that might look like. So yeah, that's what I'm going to do today. So let's go ahead and switch it over and we'll dive into it. Like I said, the basics are the same. Going to be sketching in pencil, going to be using the black ink to outline it and to create textures and stuff, but just trying a different view, basically a different perspective with the monster. So let's go ahead and let me switch it over. So I've got my mixed media paper. Again, it's a smooth paper, and if I ever wanted to paint it or do mixed media on it, then I can easily use that. Got a basic pencil. I've got my pens, and I almost forgot my eraser. So I'm good to go. Let's go ahead and dive in. And when I think about the selfie, I'm really thinking about like the monster's face really kind of takes up most of the space. And I could draw it just so it really takes up all the space, but I kind of like to have the face off center a little bit, just to kind of create a little bit more visual interest. So I think I'm going to have the face over here with a little bit of a background here, maybe a little bit of a horn showing, but maybe not even have any arms. Definitely not going to have any legs. So when I start with these, I start with the eyes, and I want to have, nice big eyes. And that's going to kind of frame the monster, So there's one eye, maybe the other one. I think maybe this one's going to have to be bigger. So just starting off with some simple shapes, and I'm kind of keeping the eyes about a third of the way down, and if I kind of divide it in half, it's almost like a third this way. So we call that the rule of thirds. And just like before, I have that style, and like I said, this style is something that I developed over years. If you're just starting off with monsters, kind of do your own thing. If you're having trouble, I do have that PDF. Feel free to download it. Feel free to use it. If you're a teacher, feel free to use it with your students. Just it's good for educational purposes. But of course, it is copyrighted, so you can't use it to sell and use it as your own. Okay, so getting the eyes in there, that really starts to establish the monster. Again, I don't put noses with my monster. It's just something I don't do. Sometimes with these selfies, I think about sort of eyebrows or cheekbones. So instead of just doing a shape, I'm going to do like kind of an eyebrow shape here, and then there can be one that comes in on that side, and the same thing down here, kind of like a cheekbone, and then maybe one that kind of comes up here. All right. Thinking about a mouth. So there's his mouth with a lip, and that's going to come down. And then I didn't draw in this part because I'm thinking about the teeth. And just like I did with the last monster, I'm going to give him some sharp teeth. And then up here's the top of his head, goes out of the picture, and then this is going to come down. Okay, and then I need to kind of put this little part maybe right here with the tooth. Okay, so I've got, the big eyes, I've got his kind of eyebrows, cheekbones, big mouth, and I've got space over here where I can start to put in a horn, and it's going to go off the paper. All right, if I wanted to, I've got room in here to start an arm, and maybe it just goes down and goes out of the picture frame. Okay, so it's really about kind of having this monster kind of going out of the frame. So it's a nice up close view of the monster. Okay, and again, I'm not going to put a lot of details in it. I hold off with the details until after I get it inked up. So got it all sketched in with my pencil. Going to grab my thinner, my super fine Faber-Castell Pitt Artist pen, and just like I've done before, I'm going to simply outline it. And as I outline it, I don't worry so much about like sticking to the pencil marks, and I often go off. And I've mentioned before this notion of confident lines. And so if you're trying to go super, super slow and try to be super careful, oftentimes what happens is you end up shaking, and you might not end up with it as smooth as you would like. And also, I find by doing it this way and kind of being quick and trying to be confident with my lines, that if things are a little uneven, that's okay. It actually gives the monster some character. If we get so caught up in like, oh, I have to make it perfect, we can just get caught up in it and just kind of feel like, oh, it's never good enough. We're not perfect. We're human beings, and things can be kind of wonky and things can be kind of off, and that's okay. And that's just part of that inner critic. I think we all have it, and we sort of like, oh man, that's not straight. Oh, I went off the line, and so we kind of end up berating ourselves and feeling like we messed up or we failed in some way. Okay, so that quickly I've got it basically outlined, and then just gonna take my eraser and erase. And I just want to be careful as I'm erasing. So I'm using mixed media paper, and it's a nice heavy duty paper. I use it mostly whenever I'm doing mixed media work, where I'm painting and collaging and drawing all into one work, and I could do that, and eventually I probably will use other materials. For right now, I'm just kind of sticking with the basics. And I just realized I forgot to trace this one little spot. So I could just use drawing paper. I could do this in a sketch pad. I could do this in a journal. So you could really do this anywhere you want. You could draw monsters. You could make an entire page in a book, in a sketchbook, or in a journal of monsters. And I've mentioned this before, whenever I'm erasing, I'm trying to take my time. I'm not trying to go real fast and real big, because that can end up, I can end up crumpling up the paper a little bit, especially if it's thinner. Maybe not so much with this mixed media paper, but if you're using a thin sketch paper or drawing paper, if you're going real fast because you want to get it done real quickly, you run the risk of really crumbling the paper. Sometimes you just press hard with the eraser and that crumbles it, or what I find is that you go off the paper and then you come back on and the eraser catches the edge of the eraser catches the edge of the paper. And then it's then it's crumpled, and then you're like, oh man, I just messed it up. Okay. So yesterday I just used that super fine pen, but today I am going to switch to my thicker pen because it is a up close view, and so there are definitely lines that I want to have that are super thick, and I'm going to start with the outline of the face. And so I can have some really nice bold lines quickly with this thicker pen. But again, if you don't have a thicker pen, just use what you have. So I want this eye to be thicker, so I'm just going to kind of go around it a second time and really make that a nice bold thick line. I'm going to hold off with the other parts except for the iris. Or not the iris, the pupil. Okay. Eventually I'm going to mix it up. I'm going to use some other materials. I'm going to use some paint and collage. But I kind of want to stick at least several days with the material and really focus on using it. And it's just that notion of developing ideas. I think often we get this notion of, we do it once. And I always call that a one and done mentality. That we unfortunately have this one and done mentality where it's like, oh, well, I did that, so why am I doing it again? And with art, though, I mean, we can't have that mentality, because if we just do it one time, we're not going to learn everything that we want to learn. Maybe we're not going to be as successful. I mean, maybe we need to try it 10 different times to really feel like we're being successful with it. So I mean, like monsters it's pretty easy to be successful, and if you're using that PDF and looking at that Monster Maker workshop sheet that I have, you can use those for ideas and feel pretty successful. But as you do it, as you make more monsters, you might start to feel like, hey, I'm starting to kind of develop my own. Like I was saying, when I first got into making monsters 5 years ago, I didn't really have a style. I was looking at what was out there, and I wasn't copying, but I was paying attention to these other things, and it wasn't really my style. And then over time, I developed my style. So you might, I have a very distinctive way of doing the eyes. And you might look at that and go, oh, that's really cool. But then you might think of a different way. Or you might look at that sheet that I have. Or maybe you do some research and you find some other monsters. And then you start to think like, oh, well, what if I did it this way? It just goes for anything. It's not just for monsters. All right, so I have the basics outlined. I just find that this thicker pen just kind of makes me feel like the lines are kind of clunky. And I do like to go back, and I did this with the first one. I do like to go back and use the thinner pen to help, I wouldn't say even out the lines, but to make them feel less clunky. I don't know if there's, I don't know, I feel like with the thinner point, I can smooth out the lines. They're still uneven, but I don't know, I like it better. So I can start to add some of the details like in the eye. Kind of start out with these little kind of curvy little bumpy lines, and then start to create these lines that go in toward the pupil. And if I wanted to, I can even just do some lines that kind of curvy lines in there. Just kind of gives it a little bit of a texture, makes it a little bit more interesting. Now, because the monster ends up being up close, and that means that it ends up being bigger, I really have an opportunity to really explore the textures and the patterns. And so, of course, that's going to come after I'm kind of done with the outlining. So again, you could do any kind of eyes that you want. Like I've said before, I kind of base mine more on human-like eyes. But you could think about animals. Think about snakes that have different kind of pupils. It could be a slit instead of a circle. You can make your monster look sleepy. There's all kind of things. You could add eyelashes and eyelids. Okay. So I turn my paper. And that just allows me to reach all the parts a little bit easier. Okay. So again, just using this thinner pen just to maybe thicken the lines a little bit. The thinner pen gives me a little bit more control. Okay. So I'm going to actually pull out a different pen. So this is, I didn't mention this at the beginning, but I wasn't sure if I was going to use it. This is the XS, I think the extra superfine pen. So just a much smaller, just a much smaller tip. And so I should be able to get some real thin lines. So I think it was yesterday's monster. I did some like little dashes around this inner ring in the eye. So I'm kind of doing something similar, but these lines are so thin that I am overlapping them and kind of making them long. So it's almost like I'm coloring them in, but I'm leaving some of the white show. Very much like I did with the horns yesterday. And then if I wanted to, because this is so small, I can put in extra lines. And since this is a close-up, what if I put in just like some little lines around the eyeball, just to kind of make it look like that eyeball is a little bit rounded, like maybe this is a little bit of reflection or shadow. And if I wanted to, if I put in more lines on one side, like kind of on the outside of this ring, it's going to make it a little bit darker. So I haven't really talked too much. I mean, I've talked a little bit about shading, and with a pen, it's much harder. But by putting more lines on the outside, it starts to kind of create some shadow. And then if I put a little bit on the inside, So it's on the inside of the ring, close to the eyeball. But in the middle of the ring, I'm kind of leaving it lighter. So the idea, hopefully, is that it starts to look rounded. And do the same thing over here. So again, I'm just kind of doing these longer, thin lines. So I just start out trying to make them even. And I'm probably going, 1/4 of an inch to like a 1/2 an inch. So by leaving a little bit of that white showing, it allows me to fill in the space, but not make it totally black. And then I move in and I just put a few more lines around the outside. And then do the same thing on the inside of that kind of ring. Again, because this monster's closer, he's bigger, the eyes are bigger, I can do more of that. I can put in more detail. If I wanted to, I can make little veins in the eye, make it look like he has bloodshot eyes. Okay. So I'm just trying to think. I want something around. So I've done things where maybe I'll do a whole bunch of spots. One day I did really small spots, but I think what I'll do now is just kind of do a series of different spots, and then maybe do some dots and some lines around. I'm thinking that might be just a little too thin, so let me switch it up. So some are a little bit bigger, some are a little bit smaller, but I'm not making like really big, huge spots. And then I think once I get these in, I'll go back and do some more of that the lines and the dashes and the dots that I started. Kind of makes sense to do all the little circles first. Alright, go ahead and switch over to my small one again. So I'm just kind of doing like just little dots and little dashes. Just trying to fill in a little bit of the space around those little circles. So just kind of let the pen kind of bounce and dance. It just helps to bring a little bit of focus to the eyes. Okay. I think I like doing these little stripes on the ring around the horn. Kind of thinking about how like maybe this little part has ridges in it. And then like before, I like having the little bit of texture on the teeth. Yesterday I kind of felt like I really darkened them. I'm going to try not to do that so much. So I just keep thinking like I want to have it darker back around his teeth and kind of underneath the cheekbones. And I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to do some of these little like circles, but maybe have a few that are bigger. So I'm just trying to put more of these like little circles in there. Maybe do a couple up here. And so now I think what I want to do is, since I'm going to do similar like things, but I want to have it like even darker. So I'm trying to put more of those kind of dashes and dots and squiggles. And it's just going to make it a little bit darker, put a little bit of value, and I might just go in. So just trying to like hit some of these circles, go over them a couple times. this takes a while, but I mentioned yesterday that sometimes it's just nice to slow down. And I sometimes think about the textures and the patterns, kind of like if you're familiar with Zen tangles or Zen doodling, and how in that, not that I'm doing that, I'm not turning the monster into a Zen doodle, not using those kind of patterns, but it's just that notion of thinking about different patterns and different textures to use, and then just taking my time and slowly doing them. And so you kind of get in that rhythm. You can kind of get into a relaxed state. Yeah, I find so often that we artists just kind of like, oh, I want to get this done. Oh, this takes too long. So I find I do a lot of spots, and also like thinking about these like spots. Since there's so many of them, they starts to feel kind of like bumpy. So like this monster's, like yesterday I kind of did one that has fur. So this guy has more kind of bumpy skin, I guess. So I'm just kind of going back over some of these circles, these little dots that I did. Kind of making them feel like the ones down here, so it all kind of flows and fits together. I think on this outer ring, I've left it alone for right now, but I want to have some texture. So just like I did these lines around the inside of the eyeball, I'm gonna do some of those around the outside of this ring, just to give it a little bit of texture and almost like a little bit of value, a little bit of shading. I'm using this, this extra fine, extra super fine pen, so I'm getting a real thin line. Add a few more of these thinner lines to the teeth. Actually, I just thought about almost like wrinkles in the forehead. So just kind of putting these lines underneath the lip just to create a little bit of shadow. I want to kind of continue some of these spots, but I want them to be bigger. So I think down here on what would be his stomach or his belly. I have a few of these. And switching it up to that extra super fine. Again, just kind of doing some squiggles and dashes around just to, repeat what I've done up there. Give it a sort of a bumpy texture. So it's like I'm doing little dots, little dashes, little squiggly lines. Again, just kind of letting that hand dance and tap and okay. So he's looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and switch it up. I think I want some stripes. So I've done stripes on arms before, but I think maybe this time do them a little bit more even. I like to give them a little bit curved. I want to give this a little bit of form. Since I'm doing a little bit of shading, I'm going to just put some of these little lines, and that's going to help just give it a little bit of shadow, little hatching lines. Do the same thing on this side. And maybe come back, thicken the stripes. Switch up to that thinner one. Just coming in and putting a few lines next to these stripes. Maybe do a few of these hatching lines. kind of feel like I want to have every other one dark or darker. So just like I did around the ring up here, putting some of these lines in and putting more at the edge, make it look dark, like there's shadow, and it's lighter in the middle, starts to make it look rounded. And this is with that really extra super fine pen. So you can see how it starts to look a little bit more cylindrical. So I want this to be a little bit darker underneath his eyes here. So doing some hatching, just like I have been, just sort of some vertical lines. They're going to blend in, not be so noticeable. Just makes it a little bit darker. And then maybe up here, do some more lines and dashes on the horns. So yesterday I did a lot of dark lines on the horns just because I kind of did it with the teeth. And so now I'm just kind of doing some thinner lines just to make it look like the horns maybe have like little ridges or something on them. But if I put more at the bottom, it starts to give it a little bit of shadow. I think I want to come back and maybe make this a little bit thicker. And actually, if I put little bumps on it, make it feel like there are ridges on it. All right. I think just one more thing. His lip looks a little weird. And I think it's because the shading on it's a little bit different than in other places. Okay. I'm thinking this guy's done. So go ahead and sign it. All right. There you go. All right. So day number 3. Got another monster done. Again, this is just kind of thinking about more like a monster selfie, kind of up close and kind of personal. So anyway, hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'd love to see some of your monsters. So if you've been making monsters, think about posting in the comments, either on this video or where I share the image. So I try to post a photograph of the image whenever I'm done. And or if you post on social media, tag me or tag a monster a day. Would love to see what you're up to. So thank you so much for joining me. Hope you're enjoying the series. Tune in tomorrow. I'll probably do another recorded monster drawing, and probably still stay with drawing monsters, and then I am going to eventually get into painting. So anyway, so thank you for joining me for day number 3. Hope you enjoyed it, and as always, happy creating. Oops.